Pratik, do you want to just put up the question? Great. So if you guys are coming back to your seats, just look at the question. If you are on the table, please go ahead and vote so we can start the session after we get the response from this vote. Yes, please vote if you haven't voted. Wow. Okay, great. And Anshu, is Anshu in the room or has he left? You're there. Good, good, good. What did you vote, Anshu? Just yell, stand up and yell. You're surprised, right, on the yellow? You're thinking it's deteriorated? Yeah? That's your feeling it's deteriorated. So just since we don't have a mic, I just want to repeat what Anshu just said. Thank you, Anshu. He was saying it's not just feedback from today's session and NGOs, but just what he's been hearing from quite a few people. He feels that it's deteriorated. Kalyani, are you in the audience by any chance? What about you, Jitin? What do you think? Yeah, you knew I was going to call on you. You could just yell and then I'll repeat. You think it's improving. Good, good. And anyone who thinks, what was the third option, Pratik? Stayed the same? Yeah? Okay, so the last panel, or sorry, 2 panels ago, we talked about CSR. This next panel is about private philanthropy. And of course, the last panel was about development impact bonds, or DIBs. And the reason I think it's important to talk about these 3 areas somewhat separately is because there are different strings attached. There's different items that can be funded from different donors, and there are clearly ups and downs in each of these categories. And in totality, I think sometimes it's difficult to sort of paint the picture if philanthropy is up or down. But we're trying our best today, I guess, and tomorrow, and honestly for the past decade, to bring some of these nuances to the table, to highlight some of the issues that exist in funding overall, and then help ideally funders and NGOs sort of find a good match, of course realizing that government, media, and others need to play a role in sort of this collaborative impact to make things done. But it's important to realize that there are different flavors of money that comes into the door. And really investing, whether you're a corporate, whether you're a British Asian Trust looking at development impact bonds, whether you're an Educate Girls receiving money, realizing that first and foremost, trust needs to be built in each of these relationships. And I think now, perhaps more than ever, is the time for that trust to be built. We're very happy, number one, to have so many NGOs in this room. So we have about 70% of the 200 people here today are representing NGOs. About 20% are representing donors, and about 10% are intermediaries. These are groups that sort of bring the NGOs, the donors, the sector sort of together. The reason I bring this up is because for the first decade, Dasra worked primarily with NGOs. We realized very quickly our heart lied in working with social entrepreneurs like Anshu, like Jitin, like Kalyani from Nas Foundation, and others that are in this room. And we really wanted to support you all with your journey of scale, of impact. We are strong believers that you know the communities you serve. Many of you come from those same communities. And many of you guys are very much sort of with the heart and soul, like Anshu talked about sort of 2 panels ago, of really creating systemic change in India. As we worked with you guys on the ground, helping with various efforts, you guys were the ones who actually said, look, for us to grow, for us to scale, for us to actually utilize a lot of the systems and processes that you and others have put in place, we need access to funding. And through that is why we really created something called a giving circle. And the point for us was to engage high net worth individuals. We stayed away, honestly, at that time from corporates. The reason we stayed away from corporates is because even right now there is a law, like Anshu talked about, the 2%. We wanted to focus on individuals who have the ability to give closer to 100%. Corporates, they're created to create shareholder value, not to solve societal problems, where we found, just like the individuals, yourselves, social entrepreneurs who run these NGOs, we've believed in the power of individuals who are giving money. We believe that there could be a deep sense of respect and humility for the communities they were serving, that you guys are serving, as NGOs, that donors felt the same way, and they were just looking at ways to get involved and engaged. And so we created this giving circle model, number one, to bring 10 funders together and to select collaboratively an organization or organizations to support over the next 3 to 5 years. Few things we changed in this model was, like we talked about in the last panel, it was completely funding that was unrestricted. And what we meant by that is we didn't care about which line item you were spending the money on. We actually cared that you were given the flexibility to make decisions as you learned from various interventions to actually solve the problem. Kalyani is nodding her head. That was new to the donor space. Most donors ask for proposals, maybe 3 years, maybe 1 year, maybe 5 years. They ask for 25 different line items. If you change from one line item to the next, you have to go through crazy proposals to even get approvals for that change, much less doing the work. Where for us, we said, let's go to individuals who actually would believe and trust the social entrepreneurs, just like we had done for the first decade, and bridge that trust where these philanthropists are giving that same rigor, discipline, and commitment to the communities that you all serve, that you guys have been doing for so long. And that was really the creation of this giving circle. Little did we know, by bringing 10 people together, we helped individuals leave their egos at the door. By bringing 10 people together, we were able to bring multiple perspectives, not just in deciding which NGOs to support, but I think more importantly, in enabling these groups, many of you again in this room, to scale effectively. And by bringing these people together, and again, you as NGO leaders together, and having regular interactions, we were able to really create a trusting relationship, which has not only allowed individuals to become smarter in terms of what it takes to scale organizations, but I think simultaneously we've enabled NGO leaders to become smarter and maybe also more open to getting ideas in, getting more support in, and working sort of at a collaborative level. And so this next panel really talks about private philanthropy, because that's been the area of focus for Dasra, at least for the last decade, in addition to, of course, continuing our work with NGOs. And we've been very fortunate to work with multiple philanthropists, either through giving circles, about 100 philanthropists we've worked with over the years, or through other engagements, and really helping them get exposed to the sector, helping them create greater impact for the organizations they support, and helping them build longer lasting, trusting relationships with the NGOs present in this room and many that are not. With that in mind, simultaneously, I think what was happening in the country and perhaps globally was quite interesting. And so private philanthropy has picked up significantly in the country. According to the Huron list, 5 donors last year had given up to 30,000 crores of commitments away, some of them actually who were presenting, or their colleagues were presenting on stage today. According to Carve, Private Wealth magazine, or business, $128 billion are going to be transferred from one generation to the next in the next decade. $128 billion. I can't even do the math to figure out how many crores that's going to be, but the reason this is critical for the development sector is because usually when such large transfers of wealth happen, a lot of that wealth ends up going into philanthropy. This is wealth that's not tied by corporate boards. This is wealth that can fund things that may seem intangible. This is wealth that can fund things that may seem activist-driven as well. This is wealth that's been created in the country, hopefully by legal means, by individuals who are looking to partner with organizations long-term. And so from that perspective, I think we've learned a lot, just like we had from all of the NGOs in the room for our first decade, from 1999 to 2009. Over the last sort of 8-9 years, we've been learning a lot from the philanthropists, what their journeys are, how they can get more engaged. And to be honest with you, been pleasantly surprised with the momentum of not just these individuals unlocking capital, but I think more importantly, these individuals bringing their best to the organizations they support. And that's really what this next panel is about. There's lots of statistics that talk about the growing funding that's occurring in the country. We already talked about CSR, where, I mean, last year alone, between 10 to 15,000 crores was given. Unfortunately, I think what's not spoken about is the decreasing of funding that's happening simultaneously. And so foreign funds, FCRA, as we all know, has been regulated quite heavily. And about 10 years ago, in 2006, we had 22,000 crores that came into the country through FCRA funds, foreigners, multilateral agencies, companies, et cetera, giving money to India. This last year, it was 6,500. And so we went from 22,000 crores a decade ago to 6,499 crores, to be precise, this past year. And so there's a real need, clearly, to replace that capital. I think we all are sitting here at the Bombay Stock Exchange wanting more Indian capital to come in, but perhaps many of us don't realize how much of additional capital that was coming in is not coming in anymore. And so I think the pace of which indigenous or philanthropy needs to pick up is probably not at the same pace as foreign funding is decreasing in the country. And we're not going to go into the reasons or assumptions why that's happening, but I think it's just important to know that. I think it's also important to know that these many global institutions who've just been around giving for decades, if not generations, they actually come or came with a lot more knowledge of the sector. And so while new money is coming in, whether it's corporates or family money, they don't necessarily have PhDs in women's studies like individuals from these more established funding agencies did. They don't necessarily have 30 years of realizing the need to fund behavioral change and why that's critical. They haven't funded perhaps groups like Grameen and microfinance, which again took 40 odd years through grant funding to become then sustainable business as we see it today. And so I think there's a lot, unfortunately, there's a knowledge vacuum that's been created that we're trying to, in our very small way at Dasra, sort of solve. But the positives, I think, and you'll hear from 3 of the philanthropists today, there's a real intent for these individuals to get engaged, to get involved. They're talking about scale, they're talking about strategy, they're again talking about trusting the entrepreneurs that they support and enabling both the funder and the entrepreneur make mistakes together. That was an earlier panel today on failures. I think all 3 of these philanthropists readily agree that to do something that's risk-taking and messy, failures need to occur, but ideally it'll be open communication channels, partnerships, and ways forward that really create greater impact for the communities at the end of the day that we're all trying to serve. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the moderator, Arnav from the Gates Foundation. They've been fantastic in supporting Dasra through some of these efforts and taking sort of experiments with us or risks with us to try to build more of this movement in the country. And we have 3 funders, all that we've been fortunate at Dasra to work with. Ranjit Malkani, who's been a member of Dasra Giving Circles in the past, who's attended various gatherings. Ranjit and Anjul actually have been active sort of in the philanthropy space and are looking to sort of up their giving and their involvement. Leena Danderkar again, who I see at more NGO conferences than most. She's extremely interested in learning, being in the field, and seeing what's happening. And finally, Shloka, who not only, again, supports organizations, but also runs a few initiatives using their core competencies as a family and a business to create social change. So I'd love to turn it up to you guys to sit on this panel and really give us insights and stories of what you guys are grappling with.